And Emily, we can start to record. So again, welcome. My name is Cheryl Kaiser. I'm the Executive Director of the Lewis Institute and Babson Social Innovation Lab here at Babson College. And as I said earlier, this is Global Entrepreneurial Leadership Week. We are really excited about today's Impact Unplugged. For those of you who know the Lewis Institute, we help create pathways for all of our students, faculty, staff, alumni, and partners to create their own way to create social impact in the world. There are many ways to do that. And today you're really going to see an amazing a journey of Camille in terms of the impact that her organization is making, and I'll introduce her in a second. But these are conversations called Uncommon Table Conversations, and we like to say they're conversations for relationship, for possibilities, and for action. This conversation is in service to all of you online, which is at least quite a few, at least 3 pages long of people on this Zoom call. And like all other uncommon tables, we want you to ask a question. You can also put it in the chat, but just unmute yourself when you want to ask a question. We have Kristen and Emily and myself. We're going to try to monitor and look at when you're trying to talk. You can also use the raise your hand, which makes it easy for us to see if you want to be asked. So if you're trying to talk and you can't get in and you've tried to unmute, just raise your hand and we can actually see that and we'll call on you. So with that, it is such an honor to introduce Camille Manning-Broome. She's the CEO and president of the Center for Planning Excellence. And why this is such an important conversation today is given the context we all live in. Her leadership has been amazing on issues of land loss, coastal community sustainability, climate change, resilience and adaptation, as well as resident-led community planning, and has contributed to the transformation of cities, towns, and parishes throughout Louisiana, which most of you know is an oil and gas state. It's not easy to do what she does in the state that she's doing it in, but this has all led her to also, which we congratulated her earlier because she's been invited to be on a governor's task force on climate. So I'm going to start the way we always start with an uncommon table and ask Camille to tell us a little bit about what calls her to do what she does and how she's gotten to where she is today before we actually get into what CPEX does and how we all can take some form of action in our own lives around climate. So Camille, thank you for being here.
Great. Thank you so much, Cheryl, and everyone. It's great to see you. I'm really happy to talk with you and share my passion and love, which is the future of our Earth and how we all play a part in making it to be the healthiest and best place that it can be for future generations. I got on this journey and not a linear fashion at all. My undergraduate degree was in art history. Had these visions of moving overseas and working in museums, and graduated with an art history degree, started grad school working overseas in museums, and living in European cities. I started understanding and seeing the vast differences on consumption and design of the built environment, just an ecological and environmental acknowledgement that I didn't see in the United States. And so I read the Kyoto Protocol, which is one of the guiding documents around climate change that came out in 1990. And it was, the globe coming together and scientists coming together to talk about and publish on what's happening with climate change and what the future looked like and what needed to happen. And it was an epiphany for me. And I knew immediately that I had to be part of this. And while I loved history and art and social, the social human world, I felt I needed this draw for something that was more fulfilling for myself. And so I moved back home and enrolled in all the necessary chemistry classes and statistics and environmental classes that I needed as prerequisites to be able to get into the College of the Coast and the Environment and at LSU. All of a sudden I started making straight A's. It's just, and my dad said, well, yeah, I could have told you that. You've always been great at science. Because art history was really hard for me. And then I went to graduate school in the Coast of the Environment. And my focus, this was pre-Katrina and Rita, my focus was working with fishing communities across Louisiana's coast on climate risk and adaptation. And I fell in love with the people and saw the pain and the despair that the future holds for them regardless, and started working on climate adaptation plans and how are we going to not only mitigate the impacts of and reduce greenhouse gases, but help the communities that need us most, the most vulnerable, adapt to these big changes, which they don't have the resources to do, and we don't have the leadership to do either. And so that really grounded my love. And since that time, I have dedicated my career to working across Louisiana at all scales, at the community level, regional, governmental level, grass tops, grass bottom, or bottom up, to focusing on policies to change our built environment so that we can adapt and build the cities of 100 years from now, not the haphazard cities and the design that we've built that doesn't work for anybody. And we've seen that on center stage with COVID. And so that's a little bit about my journey.
Thank you so much. And so much of what you talk about and what you do is around intentional good design. And you just quickly mentioned it. I think that all of us have been pretty front and center of just how bad our communities have been designed. And so could you speak to some of the work that you're doing, some of the projects that you're doing, particularly during COVID, and resilience around communities?
Yeah, and so the Center for Planning Excellence, we work at all scales. And in Louisiana, you don't have a history of planning because you didn't have a lot of population movement. It's been a very static population over time, so people were good neighbors. However, since Katrina and Rita, we've seen a ton of movement, people, moving from the coast, and overnight, lots of shifts. And so planning wasn't really high regarded or prioritized in Louisiana until Katrina and Rita really exposed our vulnerabilities and our land use patterns. And so since that time, which is really when CPEX grew into an organization, we've worked in about 35 communities across our state. And what we do is we go in, and it's highly public driven and a transparent process. So many times it's the first time we're getting the entire community together. We create committees. We're highly intentional about the representation and the voices heard, and we conduct lots of public meetings. But with the community, we develop a vision for where the future is going, where they want to go in the future 20 years from now. And then we do a lot of data analysis, looking at a lot of different trends. And then we put together with the community a blueprint on how to achieve that vision through changes in land use and policies and programs around housing, transportation, economic development, arts and culture, open space and preservation, environment. And in Louisiana, a lot of that planning, what we do differently than a lot of planning groups is we focus on adaptation because our environmental constraints from climate change are so grave here, because we're constantly flooding and there's just a lot of shifts. So the way that we've designed our communities they haven't been designed for the future. They haven't been designed for the amount of rainfall that we're getting, coupled with the amount of drought that we have. They haven't been designed for thinking about the integration and of people coming together for cities. You think about COVID-19. One of the silver linings is that we've been forced to pause and rethink everything. Major disruptions have spurred remarkable innovations, and planning for a better, more resilient future. The triangulation between climate change, public health, and socioeconomic inequities should form the cornerstone of our response and thinking about building the communities of the future. And so many of the gaps that we see from COVID are related to the built environment. Our cities were intentionally designed to separate incomes, and the amenities in low-income areas are not the same in higher income areas. Our communities were designed for us to be auto-oriented and have to use a vehicle to get everywhere. We haven't prioritized green space and public parks and access to those parks through bike and ped and other transit options. And so really rethinking entirely how we design our cities is the cornerstone of our work.
Terrific. Just one more question I'd like to ask is, how hard is it to remediate? We were talking about innovation, and we've seen innovation across all sectors during COVID, where certain things were easier to do, and you didn't have to go through many of the processes because people just wanted to move ahead to solve a problem. How hard is it to remediate during this time with a built environment to be able to move towards the innovations you're talking about?
So when COVID happened, cities across the globe immediately made commitments in installing bike lanes. They had to move people off of large transit systems. People wanted to be outdoors. Bike sales went up tremendously across the country, across the globe. There were times you couldn't even get one. You're on a waiting list. And so, especially with e-bikes. And so we've seen tremendous changes overnight. Restaurants took over a lot of the front parking spaces where we've overbuilt for parking to begin with, and turned that into outdoor patio seating. And so, we've demonstrated with this that we can do remarkable changes to enhance the built environment, essentially overnight. And so I think that this is going to create a larger demand. People like sitting outside. They like being able to ride their bikes or walk to different places. And in the planning community, we feel as though this is going to make huge shifts for getting to a better designed built environment.
Terrific. And so we have a question from Professor Caroline Daniels. Caroline, do you want to ask the question?
I found my unmute button. So yes, in the planning that you just mentioned, this is wonderful, because you're basically going forward, looking 10 to 20 years ahead, and then working backwards, which makes so much sense, and building in equity. And I assume that you're taking environmental concerns into account too, and the role that the Louisiana coast plays in the environment, which has largely also been sort of not thought about when we were doing our city planning. We just kept building closer and closer to the Delta, et cetera. So I'm wondering how you take that into account, the role of the Delta in the environmental ecosystem, and also protecting wildlife, et cetera.
Yeah. So the key to how we're planning and designing the future is adaptation and adaptive management, and also nature-based solutions. And so if you think about sea level rise, we're projected to get 2 feet of sea level rise by 2050, and it could be 2 to 10 feet by the end of this century, depending on the Antarctica and Greenland ice melting rates. And so if you build a levee, you can imagine the operation and maintenance cost of that, and that you'll just have to keep lifting it up. It's considered maladaptive. Where we're seeing huge strides across the globe in nature-based solutions and thinking about places that can withstand many different changes because of sea level rise and different ways to live along the coast. And so we recently published 6 adaptation plans that was led by the Louisiana Department of Office and Community Development. And it's called the LA Safe Plans. I encourage y'all to look at them, because what we did is we worked in 6 high-risk parishes, and we did a regional plan as well, but we had to design and think about the future of our most high-risk communities. Those are the people on the front lines on our coast. And then the medium risk areas, and then the lower risk areas, and create adaptation plans for how you plan for losing community and population and how you plan for gaining, because everybody's moving north. And so this was a really critical exercise and planning effort. I mean, highly robust, because it allowed us in Louisiana to think about things so incredibly different than even what's happening across the globe. And we have a lot of global partnerships. And the reason we're ahead of the game on this is because we don't have any other choice. We're resilient because we have to be. We are on the front lines of this and have been for quite some time. And so, I think the environmental considerations and ecological systems are paramount in this, and especially when you start thinking about nature-based solutions, because it's going to work best for us regardless. So,
Great. Thank you very much. Kevin, do you want to unmute and ask your question, and then we'll get to Mixmaya right after that. You're on deck after Kevin. Kevin, do you want to unmute?
Some folks may not be able to unmute with their technology. So Cheryl, you might want to just vocalize the question.
Yeah. So what aspects should we take into consideration for investment in agribusiness, with agribusiness and impact? Am I getting that question right, Kevin? What is the impact? What should we consider in the investment of agribusiness and its impact on the environment?
So I am not an expert in this area and probably know enough to be dangerous. I will tell you that our farmers are going to have a lot of negative impacts because soil compositions are changing. You can go to Climate Central and see the predictions and changes in temperatures and droughts and heavy downpours to see what the future looks like. And I am, we see a lot of agricultural businesses. Those that are thriving are adapting and putting in new irrigation systems. And we still have increased population growth and being able to feed everyone. And so I'm not certain about agribusiness, but I do know there are great challenges there. I think in Louisiana, we've had serious issues with our agricultural community because places that have never flooded are flooding now and multiple times a year, even in central and north Louisiana. But I do see an opportunity for big solar and big wind in some of these areas to create an enormous amount of jobs. I mean, that is the future. You can look to Texas as a great example of that. Yeah, I'm sorry, I just don't know much about that.
No, thank you for that. And thanks for asking the question, Kevin. And now one of our senior fellows in social innovation, Mixmaya, please ask your question.
Thanks, Cheryl. Camille, I'm from New Orleans, so born and raised there, but I don't live there. I live in Pennsylvania now. So I know folks in Louisiana know firsthand the impacts of climate change. In the work that I do, I'm dealing a lot, starting with the climate avoidance habit. That is, people know climate change is going on, but they rarely, if ever, talk about it with family members and friends. And I'm wondering if you find the same thing in Louisiana, or because the communities you're dealing with are right on the front lines in southeastern Louisiana,
Yeah.
you're way beyond that. But do you find that in the rest of the state, or is that just not an issue already in Louisiana?
Yeah, it's so I keep finding I live in such a bubble that it's discussed every day in my world, and in my peer groups too. But when we do work in communities, we still get a lot of pushback if you discuss it in political terms, because there's been quite the campaign to question the science. However, I think in Louisiana, everyone's experiencing it, so they've seen the change. I mean, you know, my dad took me to Pointe aux Chenes, Pasalutra, you know, Rockefeller Refuge growing up. Two of those places are barely there anymore. One is not. So everyone has seen these changes. Everyone's getting impacted, and so, you know, we're at a place where, with our governor, you know, just created a climate initiatives task force to reach net zero emissions by 2050. This is huge for Louisiana, and we've got to get really serious about it. And I think the more it's in, I'm seeing a huge narrative shift.
Mm-hmm.
And I think both the politically at the national level, we've seen a narrative shift as well. Not outwardly.
Right. Not yet. Yeah.
Yeah, but within, you know, yeah. So we're getting there. We're a lot better than when we were 10 years ago. But there's a stark contrast if you travel to Europe or Asia or places across the globe. There's no question of the science. They're all rolling up their sleeves, figuring out what to do. And so I really hope we can move away from questioning the science.
Thank you very much. Nikki, you can unmute. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Hi. Thank you so much for being here today, Camille. I wanted to ask you, so how can we fit afforestation and building carbon sinks in the building cities back up? How can we make sure that these processes are intertwined and really help make sure that cities are actually removing carbon from the atmosphere, but also making them future safe?
Yeah, that is so critical to the future of the design of our cities. You can see across the globe major commitments on greening cities, not only to reduce the heat island effect, but also for carbon sequestration. I think Melbourne in Australia did some recent planning around this, and I think they're planting like 500,000 trees in their downtown. We've designed or are starting to design more nature-based solutions in urban settings. Not just small green infrastructure, but more robust green infrastructure. Copenhagen in Denmark really has stepped up and is leading this effort on many fronts too, not only for sequestration, but also because green infrastructure helps you manage water. New Orleans has a pretty aggressive water management plan that also incorporates nature-based solutions. So this is a key area of the future, and it's going to be the way we have to design our cities. So yeah, I'm so glad you're interested in this.
Thank you so much.
Are there other questions?
Cheryl, we have one in the chat also from Kevin, who I think is not able to unmute. If you'd like me to vocalize it. Agriculture is a very expensive investment when you start a project, and managing the uncertainty of an investment. How do you manage the uncertainty of an investment and climate change and the market aspects that go along with that?
Yeah, so I know very little about agriculture, so I'll just talk about what's happening in the investment community. So natural disasters are increasingly costing banks and insurance companies a lot of money, and investors are taking notice. So banks are increasingly reluctant to issue loans in risky areas. Credit rating agencies are threatening to downgrade companies and cities' credit rating if they don't factor in climate change into their investments and their plans. Insurance companies are looking to advance in climate science and big data to improve their evaluation of risk. Swiss Re has been taking the lead in this. And just 2 points I want you to consider, because this is really fascinating. In October, NextEra, it's an energy company focused on renewable energy. It overtook Exxon as the largest U.S. energy company. And then U.S. traditional energy companies once dominated the stock market, but if you combined their total market share, it's less than any one of Google, Apple, or Amazon. So we're having massive impacts because of disasters and storms, and investors are pulling back their investment from high carbon emitting entities. There's a global call for this. The Pope just made a huge call to Catholics to pull all of their investments and resources out of high carbon emitting industries. And so the market shifts are going to be huge, and they're driving this. So even if people didn't want to do anything on climate, they're going to have to.
Thank you. That's great information. Thank you. Jacob, why don't you ask your question?
Yes, so I was wondering if there was ever a question in any of the work you do, whether a community or part of a community might better be served by migrating away from an area instead of taking on the costs of trying to save it from sea level rise or flooding.
Yeah, Jacob, this is such a huge piece, because we're expected to see over the next 80 years the largest human migration occur, and we're already seeing it in Louisiana. I do not believe that it's going to be much longer until we have more blanket policies on just buyouts. It's already happening here. We were part of the Ile-de-Jean Charles climate resettlement initiative that's moving a Native American community north, and I mean, just really, really challenging, but $48 million initiative. And then we've also been part of helping communities get entirely bought out and move elsewhere. The government's not equipped with dealing with this. I could give a thesis on this discussion, and this has been a core piece of my research and work. And so I do believe there's going to be a shift to focus on the receiving communities, enhancing the communities that are safest and less risky, and building in the housing and redesigning the housing where it's located, the social services and the networks, so that people will want to move to those places. You know, there's so many equity issues around this, and it's really challenging, but it's something that we are grappling with a lot in Louisiana and the rest of the globe. If not now, they will be over the next 80 years. It's going to be huge.
Camille, can you share with us one of the things I'm so impressed with is the inclusion of the community and the community's voice.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you do that and some examples? And then also, if you could talk a little bit about online, I saw something that was really interesting to me, the whole notion of what places can you get to in 20 minutes, how you're engaging people around thinking about their community. So if you could address that, that would be great.
One thing that I have learned over the years is that people support what they help create. And it is really, really critical that the community has a say and has a voice and where it's headed in the future. And if it doesn't, then that's not going to be a place that meets everybody's needs. Traditionally, a lot of decisions around land use and how communities have developed, what economic development incentives, how our roads have been designed, have been done by a certain group of individuals in back doors, behind closed doors, and it wasn't a public conversation about how we were designing our community. And so we really focus on a robust community and planning process. And so we do a number of things, not just by really thinking through developing an advisory committee and giving them so much ownership, because you need champions who are going to advocate for the implementation of your plan. We're a mission-driven organization. We don't want to just come in and produce a document. We want to create a movement, and we want to create leaders in the community who are going to make sure those plans get implemented. Otherwise, we don't achieve our mission of enhancing the quality of life for all Louisiana communities. And so, building those champions, making sure they have ownership, they see their voice and what's reflected. So we are facilitators, and we do use an expert lens in devising the plans. But if they don't see themselves in that, if the community doesn't see their input in that, it's not going to go anywhere. And so that's really critical. There's another movement that's been occurring for a while. It's tactical urbanism. And we've been using it for quite some time. And the first project that we did was on a highly unsafe corridor in mid-city Baton Rouge called Government Street. And so what we did is we worked with partners across the community and residents across the community, came up with a road diet design, and then worked with all of those community residents to actually temporarily redesign the street. So we had green Crayola paint where we painted bike lanes. We took it 4 lanes down to 2. We put over 158 street trees out, temporary crosswalks. We had 25 pop-up businesses. But what was so fascinating was that everyone, we had so many volunteers, and everyone got to use their hands and actually transform the space. And, because in planning, a lot of times it's conceptual, you're thinking about future design. And if people haven't traveled or then it's hard for them to think about what it could be. And so tactical urbanism, these demonstration projects have been huge. We had over 2,500 people out the first day. I mean, it was crazy to see this street that was so dangerous. You couldn't even get across it. People were flying 50 miles an hour. But during our demonstration, because of all the street trees and the design that we made on the street, cars slowed down. There were no traffic problems. Everyone felt safe getting back and forth. And, we just took over 2 blocks, but it was huge. This led to the mayor of the city agreeing to the road diet, putting in, investing, and with the state investing over $13 million into the road diet. So, when societal values change, governance changes. Those societal values must change and must be open and understood for our governance and policies to change. And so that $13 million public investment has led to 48 new businesses on the corridor. I mean, immediately businesses started buying land. Now we have definitely been focused a lot with our redevelopment authority on not having a gentrification, because that would be horrible. We want that to be a mixed and creative community, and so that has not occurred. And so it has just been fantastic. But that's the power of people.
That's an amazing example. And so I hate myself for asking this question, because I hate when people ask me this question, but I have to ask you this question because I don't have another word. But just taking that example, how do you scale that? I mean, that, you know, how do people see? I mean, it's a great story. It's a great case. And I can tell you at Babson, we're going to be telling that story a lot. But, you know, you've said a couple of things that are so powerful. You know, when people are engaged and they're doing it, they will actually buy into it and actually be the change. We always talk about be the change. You're actually, this is it. This is really what you are demonstrating. And, you know, one thing that we really focus on at the Arthur M. Blank School for Entrepreneurial Leadership is leading with values. And in a way, when society, to your point, when societal values shift, governance will shift, because in my experience, we can never look to government to ever lead. They are lagging indicators. So the only indicators are going to be us, and it's going to be societal values that lead. So is this happening anywhere else in around the country?
Oh, you mean tactical urbanism?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, communities are completely being transformed by using these tactics. And go online and look. I mean, there's so many fantastic examples, and this is also, I believe, that movement helped us in getting ready for COVID, because, you know, it's easier for a mayor or an elected official to agree to some temporary changes because of COVID. And they were doing that across the globe. There's a gentleman named Mike Lydon. He's a friend of mine, and he runs Street Plans. And if you look him up on LinkedIn, Mike Lydon, Lydon, he has a database that he has developed, which includes all the different shifts to street design and community design that have happened since COVID, and it's pretty monumental. I think you can even see it on one of his LinkedIn's. But yeah, major shifts are happening because of this.
That's terrific. I want to open it up to some more questions for our folks online. We'll wait a minute if people would like to ask. For just a minute while we're waiting for people to ask, can you tell us about the neighborhood, the 20 minutes?
Yeah. So, you know, generally speaking, you should be able to walk or get on your bike and meet all of your needs within 20 minutes. And this is, you know, our cities should be designed this way. And so when COVID happened, we wanted to talk about the changes needed to the built environment, not only to ease the transition, but build the communities of the future. And so we created a 20-minute neighborhood campaign. And so you can go onto our website. It's really fun. But we put together this self-guided activity to kind of explore your neighborhood in an entirely different way. And if you get on your bike or if you go by foot, you find out so many more things about your neighborhood versus, you know, just getting in a car. And so we created some bingo cards and really encouraging and having a robust outreach effort to get people on their bikes or by foot to see what they could get to. Can they get to a pharmacy? Can they get to a church? Can they get to a school? Can they get to a grocery store? Can they get to a movie theater? You know, all of these things. And if they can't, what impediments did they see along the way? And so we've had an enormous amount of individuals do the bingo and have been taking this information in and we'll share it. You know, we work closely with our mayor and city parish, and you know, these are the improvements that community that our riders and neighbors wanted to see. And so, you know, this is really thinking about making the changes and shifts for a more inclusive and equitable designed community in the future. We're particularly focused in some of our more low-income areas because they have the least amount of resources to access transit and parks and green space, and by result of that, have worse health impacts because when you don't have access to healthy foods, or you don't have access to transit and you know, parks and green space and being able to walk places, then you have increased rates of obesity and asthma and all of these other things. And so there's something called the social determinants of health. And for those of you who don't know, it's great to read up on that. And the Center for Planning Excellence, we're about to launch and unveil a healthy community design center where we're going to be working with health professionals to directly correlate interventions that have occurred in the built environment that lead to better health outcomes, looking at a longitudinal study over time. And so, this is really important because the planning profession has been discussing this for years, but we need new messengers.
Mhm.
We need doctors and the insurance companies and, the medical profession saying the same thing. If these are preventative measures, let's design our cities better and we'll have better health outcomes.
Yeah, and I love that you bring up the whole notion of the social determinants of health, because we were working on mobility last year, and mobility is a social determinant of health. And yet traditionally in how we look at social determinants of health, sometimes we've been a little bit narrower. But I think as a business school and a school that of entrepreneurship, I think that I think social determinants of health is clearly a roadmap and a set of criteria and values that every business leader should look to, because every business, no matter what it is, whether you're involved in urban design or planning or building, the social determinants of health are a really great sort of lens by which you should really look to, because if you're not mapping to them, you're actually not helping society. Are there any questions? We have a lot of people online, so I'll wait a minute. Just unmute yourself if you do.
Carol, I think we might have some Zoom fatigue on a Friday, for sure.
Oh, I'm ready for the
understand
weekend
that.
too.
I actually have a question, if you don't mind. I'm going to come out from behind the curtain for a second, ask a question, Camille. I love so much of what you're working on and everything. And I love the so true collaborative nature of everything that you do and bringing in all these different stakeholders. And forgive me if you mentioned this earlier, I was managing technology, but can you share with us a little bit of how you have overcome some serious obstacles? Even people that seemingly understand the basics of social determinants of health, and so much of what you talk about is about basic common sense and common sense values, but our actions don't always align with that. And when you're bringing together government officials and business people and community members and others, how do you work to move people in that direction together and to swim in the same direction when maybe sometimes there are systems and structures and real obstacles to some of that successful work happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I have never been part of an initiative or project that didn't have big obstacles. Every single one of them does. And so, you have to be in it for the long game. And think about the long game and the outcome and the benefits you're trying to achieve. And so with that, that in mind, you have to reduce fear. And so I'll give a great example. After Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, there was a lot of migration from St. Bernard Parish into a rural parish called Tangipahoa Parish. And we went in to work with the parish on its first master plan. And it's dealing with all of these shifts, all these new people coming in, these new neighborhoods coming in, developers from all over coming in and building in areas where there's no zoning laws. And so dairy farmers for the first time had neighborhoods, all around them. And so we brought together people from all walks of life to work with us on the future of that parish. And the dairy farmers were 100% against any discussions around zoning laws, which at the end of the day, you have to manage land use. And if you don't, then you should expect highly poor designed, dumb growth and expensive infrastructure and disconnected neighborhoods and all the things and that, you know, that result from that. And we worked with the dairy farmers very closely because, you know, at the end of the day, it was the amount of voices that were now around them calling elected leaders because they didn't like the smell of the cows and, you know, different things. We got them to realize like that they weren't going to lose all of their property value, that they weren't going to lose their biggest investment, which is a lot of times what we see. So people are usually, if there's a big obstacle, a lot of times it's coming from some place of fear and, you know, not wanting change. And so really understanding pain points and being able to talk about them openly and transparently is really, really critical.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I have had someone private message me a question for you that they're not able to unmute themselves. And then Selma will get to you right after that. But Camille, if I can also ask you, can you talk a little bit more about the plans and the strategy implemented in the Southern University and Scotlandville Community Project?
And so we started working with Southern University and Scotlandville neighborhood. Let's see, I guess it was about the beginning of, what year are we in? 2020. Okay, so 2019. Because of COVID, the university had some setbacks, and so we put the initiative on pause in terms of developing the Southern University master plan. But we have continued working with the Scotlandville neighborhood community. I think what's really critical there is that the community is leading the effort. We are supporters, we're facilitators, we'll help put the plan together, but it will entirely be owned by them. We want to be able to help and support in its implementation and helping make the case within the city parish and the elected leaders to prioritize resources to implement their plan. But I think the critical piece is that the plan will belong to them. We are about to get geared up with the Southern University master plan again. And so I'm really, really excited about that. And so there's a lot more forthcoming on that. And I'd love for whomever is interested in that. We've got some exciting things coming out next year if they want to participate.
Awesome. Thank you. Selma, I see you have your hand raised, and then I have another question that's been private messaged to me, but let's go to Selma first. We'll do Selma, and then I'll share Nico's question, then we'll get to you, Jacob, if that works. Selma, can you unmute and ask your question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Perfect. Thank you.
So this is all very interesting and also perfect timing because I'm actually a design engineer working on an urban planning project. And this is, so we're working on a plaza and it is in downtown. Well, it's not in Boston, but it's in another city. And what's interesting is that that plaza is like in the center of a big city, but it lost all of its property value because of homeless people, because it's not a safe area. So as a designer and an engineer, do you have any advice for me how we can be conscious of the people that are there? We're not really trying to kick them out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we are currently going through talks with the community, and we just started this. So I just wanted to get your advice as a designer.
Yeah, that is, it's a really tough one. I'm not sure of the homelessness situation there and the amenities for them and for mental illness or, you know, a number of other factors. And so I don't know. I would say that there needs to be a larger plan and vision that the city must have in addressing it and supporting those individuals and making sure that they have a space in the right space that's a healthy one. In terms of the plaza in Boston, I would think that, Boston has a pretty good a resilience plan. And so I'm pretty sure that was a robust planning effort too. I think that was done during the Resilient Cities work by Rockefeller. And so I think there could be a lot of guidance in that document. I'm not sure if you've looked to that yet.
No, not yet. But we have been looking into SIPTED, but SIPTED is also, I personally think that it's racist sometimes.
I don't know what that is.
Oh, SIPTED is,
don't-
it stands for crime prevention. Basically, it's designing to prevent crime in an area,
Oh,
which has a lot of information in it. But we are going through talks with the community, and we are currently trying to work through a resilience plan, keeping in mind everyone. But thank you.
yeah. It's it's a very difficult situation because you need resources and you need leadership and political will.
Yeah, but I'll definitely look into you said it was a Rockefeller.
Yeah, they were part of the Resilient Cities Network, and they did one of the plans. And I know the person who led it in Boston, and would be happy to make that connection for you.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you, Camille.
Thank you.
Thank you, Camille. We have a question on the chat. Sort of more generally, how can community members who want to make an impact in their city organize and bring together the rest of the community to plan, design, and execute on an initiative? So no small question there.
Yeah. So this is really funny because a person can do this. I worked in a community where there was a gentleman who wanted to organize around doing a plan. He never let it go. He was persistent, and it happened. And I've seen it time and time again where individuals, they have a mission, and then they work with partners, because everything requires partnerships and collaboration, and you build something big and there's a movement. And so I'll just say that it can happen. And if you want to know more details, you can email me if you wanted to, brainstorm some things. But it is really critical for everyone to be engaged in what their elected officials are doing. I think we're all more so now than ever, completely out of touch, or they're out of touch with us and what's happening and at all levels of government. And for me, every election is a climate election. And I want to know, and I want to have a voice and communicate. And I have the ability to do that because of my position. And I know that not every, but they do get the emails, they do receive the phone calls. And so we have got to be diligent. I also encourage people, and I've thought, I'm trying to get a lot of my friends, like, we need to also run for office, your council office or what have you. I know it seems like a challenge, but there is so much disconnect between decisions and policy decisions and who's making them and the voice of individuals. And this has got to change.
Amen. Absolutely.
Amen to that. Jacob, do you want to get your question in here?
Yes, so I was wondering about how the Center for Planning Excellence goes about getting the initial buy-in for community or community leaders to start the planning process. So do the communities come to you, or do you go to communities who you feel are in need? And also, do those communities have to pay for your services?
So we only go by invitation. And so we are invited into communities and invited by communities. Sometimes it's residents, sometimes it's, different stakeholder groups, sometimes it's the mayor or elected officials. If we're invited in by a community member, we ask them to, set up meetings with their groups, and we'll talk with all of them. We're a nonprofit, but we also have to cover our expenses and services. And so we do have to either find grants or have matching funds with grants, or we get paid outright by by municipalities and parishes. So yeah, and I think it's important that even if we were to get a grant to work with a community, I would want that community to put in some resources because they need to have skin in the game. People do not cherish and implement what they did not put resources into. So we that's been a value of ours for a long time, that we want demonstrated skin in the game. Because we don't want to waste our time. We want to work with places that really want to impact change and really want to do something. The worst thing for us would be to go in and do a robust planning effort, build so many relationships, develop a plan, and then nothing happen from it.
Camille, thank you. And Jacob, thank you for asking the question. We're out of time, unfortunately. This is recorded, so people will have access to it. But on behalf of all of us at Babson, I really want to thank you. Your generosity in answering every question, even the ones you didn't think you knew a lot about. But you've taught us a lot. I think that the values that you expressed through how the Center for Planning Excellence takes on a client, you're invited, just the language you used throughout the entire hour is such the language that we use here, particularly at the Lewis Institute around social design. And that, you start with desire, to your point, and then you can start small and get the willing. One thing I've learned of my years of being in politics is always start with the people you know are with you, then go next to the people that you think you can influence, and don't spend a lot of time on the people you can't influence, because if you get enough with the people that you influence in the right design, which you have clearly done, you will change policies. So you've been such an influence, and we thank you so much for being with us, and I know we'll be reaching out to you. So thank you again, and
Thank
just everybody
you.
be healthy and well.
Thank you so much for having me. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
You as well.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you so much, Camille.
Thank
Bye,
you,
Camille.
Camille. This was amazing.
Oh,
Thank you.
Hey, David. Good to
Hey.
see you.
This was great. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you, David.
Always
Bye.
out to support our 10KSB alumni.
I know.
Oh.